fast it's coming in or how fast you need to be able to make sense of it. And one is variety, because it's not just a simple transaction. There's many different kinds of data, and we're seeing a lot of that today. In fact, it was just the change from the Web Analytics Association to the Digital Analytics Association because of that variety. So big data is not just one of those things. You could say, well, I don't have that much data. But the reality is it's coming in at a high rate of speed. It's pretty varied. You've got to take advantage of it pretty quickly. In my mind, that requires you to think differently from the old way that you use data, and so you're dealing with big data. That's my guess.
Thank you for that. Now, I'm going to ask you to do almost the impossible. I spent about an hour on the phone with you while you explained how the open source world works. Your job is product manager of a free product.
Right.
How does that work?
Really well, thank you. So the operating model of Hortonworks is, so let me just, I don't want to make it a sales pitch, but what happened was the company was founded out of many of the engineers that built the original Hadoop open source package while they were at Yahoo. I didn't work with them when I was at Yahoo. They were part of the search team. They spun out into a commercial entity that was going to try to make Hadoop become more of the embedded framework for all systems, or all data, if you will, leveraging the existing stuff that you have in your enterprise, whatever systems they may be, analytic systems, your enterprise data warehouse, your CRM systems, and interlock with those. I think it was Gartner said that they believe that by 2015, more than half of the world's data will actually be in Hadoop. So what we're doing at Hortonworks is trying to create an ecosystem, and everything that we do, all the engineering that we do, we put back. We don't actually even own it. And it's not just open source. It's not even ours. We give it to the Apache Software Foundation. It's not simply altruistic. We do want to grow the marketplace, and that's our very first thing that we want to do. But the reality is, because we're building so much of it, and we're putting so much into it, it's a natural consequence that we know a lot about it, which means when you have needs to understand how to support it, you come to us, and that's where we make our money, not on selling you the software or licensing it.
But help people implement it.
Right.
Okay.
Or whatever.
So you're dealing with the biggest of the big on the high end, helping the high end figure it out. Let me, not to diminish the pain and suffering, go to the smaller side of it at Pandora, which is, in my mind, a company that was founded on big data. I mean, you invented the music genome. You identified 475 attributes about music and built a database, and you keep track of what music I like and what I might like. And to me, that's a data. Yeah, it's a mind blower. So here's a company that is built on data, and now you're using that to help the customer experience, to help the advertising experience. Tell us a little bit about your relationship to the data.
Sure. You know, when I think about big data, I actually think about it as actually just big storytelling. And when you think about Pandora and the genome specifically, really all it was, and if you hear, I certainly didn't make up the genome, God, wish I did. If you talk to our founder, he used to score movies for a living. And when he went in to talk to producers of movies, his goal was to find out what kind of music they liked, because that's how he would score their movie. And so he had like a spreadsheet where he had different types of music and said, do you like this, do you like this? And he would score it. And that was the kind of the starting point of the music genome, which is a really lovely story. And it's all about emotion and everything that goes along with it. And really, in Pandora's world, all of the big data, everything from the genome all the way through to what my team does, which is all of kind of we have the money-making part of Pandora, is actually telling a story. It's telling a sales story. It's telling a story to a consumer to say, here is the brand story I want to be able to tell. It's for the brands to be able to tell a story to the consumer. It's for us to be able to communicate with the users and do that in an appropriate way, and helping them understand the story of why we need advertising on Pandora to begin with. And all of those questions that you ask to tell the right story are where the big data comes in at the end of the day. And so, when I think about big data at Pandora, I always ask, well, what is the question we should be asking? And that then leads the path to, well, what are the answers we're trying to get at, and what are the data parts that we need to tell that story at the end of the day? Which is, for I think, can you call this a startup still? Some startup-ish company. I think maybe in the Republic we're not allowed to call ourselves startup. It feels like a startup too. One of the big challenges is how do you build that from nothing? So how do you build that from a spreadsheet to something? And asking those questions and remembering that you are just storytelling really helps you guide the path there. But that's how I think about big data.
So, Joe, you went from Expedia full online, behavioral, watching every mouse movement and every comment that came through voice of customer. That was a lot of data. The volume was there. Was Expedia doing big data stuff, as in like Hadoop clusters, or had you moved on before that came in?
No, we were definitely doing big data there. Not at the scale of an eBay. The volume of Expedia is less, as are nearly all sites on the planet. But yeah, it's if you're really trying to get down to the clickstream level and start tracking every click and starting to make sense of that, just the simple economics of trying to put that into traditional data warehouses with traditional BI tools starts to become both operationally and cost prohibitive. But the need was there. So how do you attack that? And I think often there are these intersections of these great technology innovations and these needs, and it was all happening underneath us, and we got in.
And what was the first need that was clearly identified that said, okay, we have to switch technologies because we need to answer this question?
It often starts with money, and we were attacking some very fundamental questions on marketing attribution and marketing spend. And to really do that well, we had to start looking at complete click behaviors across multiple sessions, across multiple touch points, and start to make sense of that. And building models and traditional statistical tools was you can do off the samples and train them and test them against other cohorts and so forth. But the degree of variability, or the volume, variety, and so forth that we were looking at was just exceeding our ability to do innovation. When you're waiting 12, 15, 17 hours for a query to come back, and you've got to do this 10, 15, 20 times, it's very hard to rapidly prototype and innovate. And there were ways for us to attack this differently that we very much embrace.
And so going through that process, those of us who've been around long enough to watch people stumble over data warehouse, customer relationship management, and how big a deal is it to do? I mean, is this an add-on that really eases the pain, or is this, we need to move in a whole different direction and implement a whole different new approach, and it's going to take, free is great, but it's going to take a significant investment in resources. Is this something you can gradually move into, or does it have to be a big corporate top-down effort?
Yeah, I'm in a new role now. I love that I'm surrounded by the innovations of changing data platforms to improve the world and trying to catalog all music in humanistic terms. So I sell blue jeans to your teenagers. Noble cause aside. But we sell cool jeans. And we make our children look cool. Very high quality. It's good price point.
You're going to have to do a sales pitch soon, too. So get ready.
No, but to me, it's never just about the tools. It's not about the data. It's sure the storytelling narrative, but ultimately it's what problems are we trying to solve? And this is another mechanism to solve some problems we've been trying to solve for a long time. And my title, another very overused term, certainly in retail, is omnichannel, which can mean anything you want it to mean. I think you're supposed to say omnichannel. I'm getting a cake made. But to me, omnichannel is very simple. It's the elimination of channel conflict in very silo-driven, channel-driven organizations. I mean, retail especially, web and stores typically are literally in most organizations competing with each other. And terms like cannibalizing sales, would that be incremental sales, or are we just cannibalizing store sales? And, oh, store sales are down, but the web is up, so there's nothing wrong with the stores. And you have these debates, and it gets down to incentive models, and, well, if someone's in the store, are they pushing people to the web, or, well, they don't get credit for that, or they do in these conditions, and are shipping and pricing and tax policies the same across these? So even to the consumer, we're not really looking at things from a consumer lens. And to solve that, you need consolidation of data. I mean, to really do this right, it's got to be fact-based. And to me, a lot of this is really, how can we start to have tools where we can start to consolidate a very fact-based view of a lot of data. I mean, we all live in sort of the digital world, but it was eye-opening to me that most retailers have devices at the front of the store that can detect every human being that walks through, their relative height and weight. They know ticket sales at the POS device. So I came to a world where I was doing conversion reporting every day, and no one meant anything to do with the web. It was store conversion. I was like, you can do that? So I mean, there's all this data, POS data, register data, loyalty data, CRM data, offline data, interactions, online, and mobile, and so forth. How do we start to bring this together to have that single view of customer? And it's a lot of data.
So
I want to start with those facts.
I want to ask you a question about the move you made, though, because you were starting Tea Leaf. You were all about the data, and you made sure it worked at hotels, and you got where you were at Expedia because you stuck to the data. When you talked to American Eagle Outfitters, what was it that made you believe that they were serious enough about the data that, yes, that was a good place to go?
It's funny. Data's been a tool for me, but I would argue I've never been about the data. I've always been focused on the customer. I mean, to me, it's how do we get better insights into the customer? And the web, that's an enormous challenge. An enormous challenge. I can walk into any store and I can tell very quickly if the store's selling or not, if the associates are behaving or not. You can do this in call centers. You can do this anywhere where there's human beings. It's really hard to walk into a website and see if the customers are pissed off or not. It's really, really hard to get that sense of view. And to me, data, which comes in many different forms, is just a sense to kind of scratch the surface and find out, is the customer happy? Are we getting it right for the customer? Where are there opportunities we're missing? They're telling us literally in feedback cards and comments. They're telling us in their actions, their clicks. And all of these things to me are just ways of getting closer to that. What I found with my new employer is an employer who is really laser focused on customer centricity, on customer service, on getting it right for the customer, and they knew they had to solve that online, and they had no idea how to do that, and that's an interesting challenge.
Bob, let me ask you to take it now to the far extreme of people who are doing this, at the speed of light, the kind of people who you work with, but their corporate culture doesn't allow them to come and talk out loud in public.
Yeah.
Is this aspirational? Is it still early days, or are there people out there who are really knocking your socks off?
It's still early days, actually. A lot of the big data push came from commodity hardware, the open source software, and all the sensors, all the data that is just being generated by the web and by everything. There are clips on cows' ears now, and they're generating megabytes a day of data about where the cow went and what its temperature is and how many times it dipped its head down, presumably to eat or drink. There's all this sensor data about your car. There's sensor data everywhere, and all those things sort of are happening kind of more or less together. Our ability to collect it. We can store it now. We never really used to be able to before because it was too expensive to store. The systems were too expensive to process. The networks were too expensive. A lot of that is being driven out, and cost isn't really an issue anymore on the infrastructure side. It's now a cost of people being able to make sense out of it.
And the ecosystem around Hadoop is burgeoning so fast that the hope is that there will be enough tools, et cetera, that it will diminish the number of people necessary. How quickly is that happening, or is this sort of a grinding to a start?
I wouldn't say that Hadoop is trying to make less people. I think the ecosystem is evolving in such that it started out as kind of a Hadoop. You could think of a Hadoop as kind of an answer to a question, which is how do we get more and more data into a system so we can process it quickly and get an answer. But that's pretty low level, and that's not really answering a business question. What we're seeing, and the tools weren't there to even operate it or set it up or anything. What we're seeing with the next generation of them is with the Hadoop 2, which will be out this summer probably, is going to be really more moving away from, we built this for big web enterprise, big web properties, to now this is actually something that a commercial enterprise could consider adopt. And in order to do that, you know that it's not going to be the first thing that the enterprise adopts. They're already going to have a bunch of systems. So the question has to be, for it to get smooth adoption and traction, how to connect with all those things.
And it has to have enterprise-level reliability and security and all that fun
operations
stuff. Let's bring it back to what I think is more like us. So, Joanna, you're a company that gets data, clearly, based on data. But what's it like, how do you start looking at using it for operations? What are the first questions you ask? We're all trying to figure out, how do I approach this? What should we be asking ourselves before diving in and starting a project?
Sure. Well, it's kind of what I said before. It's about asking what are the questions I think we want to be able to answer. You know,
Give us some examples of Pandora.
Sure. So as an example, we serve something around the tune of 15 billion impressions a month. And I have a lovely data nugget that my team gave me the other day. I'm a bit of a shoe freak. And they said that if I stacked 15 billion boxes of shoes on top of each other, it would reach the moon and back, and that's how big my closet would be. Which comes back to the telling the story part of the equation, because if you can't ask the questions to tell the story, you can't even figure out where to start. And I think about, when I first met with the management team at Pandora, my fingers were itching because I could see how early days they were. And the CFO at the time had said, I want to build the entire supply chain in the cloud. And I was like, I'm in. Because there was really nothing there to bolt onto. And I feel for you in retail because I've been in that world too. And all of the language and, you say the word pancake and you all just saw a pancake in your head. Like, people get very stuck on the way it should be. And the advantage of Pandora, and we have our challenges, but anywhere who's kind of starting out and saying, what do I start with, is kind of saying, what questions do I have? And there is no language, and I don't have to call it a pancake. I can call it a blackjack if I want to, and it creates a different image and a different story. And really approaching it that way is how to do it. So I talk about the 15 billion impressions. And the question we were looking at is, okay, well, so with these 15 billion impressions, how do we actually get the most dollars per impression? And that's where you start, and then kind of pull it backwards with your various different sales strategies. And if that's the metric at the end of the day that you want, then figuring out what are the other questions you need to have at the end of the day really makes the path very clear. So it meant that at the very beginning we said, okay, well, similar to retail, we kind of need this thing like a product SKU. We need a thing to be able to put price against, because it's about that eCPM at the end of the day. And if we have a product SKU, then we can build all of the other things. And if you look at traditional media, there's no, especially in the digital space, there's not really a concept of a product SKU. And without that, everybody's kind of chasing their tail around, well, what is this thing? And especially in the digital space, I'm sure you can talk about it at your previous job, you're also chasing your tail because the language of what it is you're measuring. So, you think about, didn't the banner just have its birthday? Like 5 or something. That's a bit older than that. It's not very old. You think about how CPM is the measurement. Well, now you've got gross rating points, and you've got cost per point, and you have AQH, and you have cost per click, and cost per download, and cost per install, and cost per acquisition. All of these layered against these 15 billion impressions. And how do you do the math around all of these sorts of things? And having the ability, if you've got that first starting point, to then say, well, it doesn't matter. If they come in with another way of saying, oh, now we want to be able to measure in bananas, we can do that because you've got that core basic. It's kind of like building a house. You have to have the blueprint and the basic blueprint of what are the core intrinsic values that we wanted at the beginning about. What are the core values of the customer, whatever flavor it is? What are the core values of a deal? What are the core values of the product? And if you go through those and just keep coming back to home base, then you can build all sorts of magic out on the other side. And then bob and weave as this industry changes, because it does change lightning fast, because there's a new word that shows up 5 minutes after you've said it, and you're like, oh my God, now I have to think about this other thing. But if you've got that, the blueprint to begin with, then you can really build all sorts of interesting things.
So building interesting things and then thinking about how you slice and dice things. Joe, I want to ask you. Hotels.com, Expedia, online companies, everybody's responsible for the bits and bytes and for knowing how to slice and dice. But now we go to a brick and mortar place. My question is about democratization. I'm scared of it because I've got a lot of people in my company who don't know where the data comes from and what they really mean and how to cross-correlate. How comfortable are you with giving the keys to the data kingdom? If here's the technology, everybody can ask the question and it doesn't bring the system to its knees. Do you feel comfortable opening up that, Pandora's box to everybody in the company?
Pancakes for all. Wait, I'm hungry now. I'll be at Denny's tonight around 1 a.m. if anyone wants to join me for pancakes. To me, that sounds great. I mean, nothing scares me more than really smart people making really good decisions off of bad data. And that happens every day at every company. But that's a solvable problem. And fortunately, at Expedia and here, I own the data, so it's my own downfall ultimately if that happens. Mm-hmm. Now, Wild West use of tools, and this is much of it with being worked on the Hadoop side, and how do we make sure that the data is understood and documented and used in responsible ways. But fundamentally, right now what we have in most organizations are pockets of data, and any pocket of data by definition is incomplete. And we have, especially in the retail world now, in many industries, the customer is crossing these pockets of data. One customer, one brand, one product, but our data sets aren't crossing that. So you end up unintentionally making bad decisions or sub-optimizing for some piece of the business without understanding the full effect across the board. And in traditional retail, that generally manifests itself as you dramatically underinvest in online marketing because you can't translate the dollars to that channel, even though it may be driving enormous business in stores or so forth. Mm-hmm. And you see these interactions across many channels. So yeah, if we can get to a world where we get to more of that single view of truth, we get a single view of the customer, a single view of transactions, and can expose that to a wider group of people to make collective decisioning. And to me, that's a world of fact-based analysis. Now it's not opinions and the old rules of thumb that it's been that way for 50 years. It's more of, okay, what does the data say? It gets into more interesting test and learn, where you can start to actually push the envelope and discover whether it be changes in the marketplace or your customers or just your own operations. I think that sounds pretty terrific.
So you have very high confidence in the capacity of the employees to understand what they're playing with. It's a nuclear device, and if you push the wrong button...
Look, you hire really good people, and then you let them be really good. For me to put handcuffs all over the organization to inhibit people from achieving their potential, mm-hmm. I'll get exactly what I designed, which is a limited solution. And there's risk, and mistakes get made, and learning organizations make mistakes and learn. Yeah. But I can't imagine why we want to hold data back. Mm-hmm. Where we've got good data.
I've got one more question, and then I am going to come and turn over to you. So start thinking about your questions. Get ready with the hands up and the elbows. Bob, back to what I was asking Joanna, where do I start? At what point I mean, not just the Stefan Hamel, it's too much data to fit into Excel spreadsheet, but what's the clue that says, hey, I should look at this new technology as a solution?
I don't think that's the right question. I think I'm going to go back to what Joe said, right? Which is what's the business problem you're trying to solve, and then what tools do you have at your disposal, and then you use those. They may not be the right tools. You may be trying to build a house with a screwdriver, and that may be the only tool you have. Eventually, you'll figure out that you need something else. And then you'll start going, well, what else is out there? And what are other people using? Maybe I'll go to eMetrics and find out, right?
And that's what I'm trying to get you to tell them. When should they look for Hadoop?
One way would be if your IT department says to you, we can't go back that far. We don't have that much data. We can't store it because it's too expensive. That's a big red flag, right? That you're throwing away data. A few years ago, you were like, okay, whatever. I guess I can live with just 3 months of data, or I'll just sample, a year's worth of data. But now, if you can do a year-over-year trend, looking at seasonality, looking at all the other effects, wow, right? You need all those clicks, you need all those transactions, you need all that stuff. And if you can't get it, worse, you're throwing it away. It doesn't have to be the transaction. I mean, I don't think anyone at eBay would be proud to say that we were throwing away all the images that people have been uploading for all the listings for years. So if you wanted to see that piece of toast that looked like the Virgin Mary was burned on it, you had to go to Google. You couldn't go to eBay, which is a real shame. So they fixed that. That wasn't the business problem, by the way. But it's an indication, right, that there's a technology limitation for you to be able to get the insights that you want. And that technology limitation is it's too expensive to store. So that would be one. Another would be that what you want to do is too hard to do in SQL. SQL was built for a much older time when, it's still really good now, but it was built for a world in which you structured data ahead of time. You built models, you built the structures and the schemas, you laid everything out, and you said, I know what I want to analyze, so I'll structure the data before it goes in so that it's quick to get it back out when I want to analyze it. But with the variety the way that it is today, it's too hard to do that. And so a lot of times you just want to get the data in, and then you'll figure it out later. And so what Hadoop allows you to do is essentially lay on structure at query time, not at load time, which blows some people's minds. But if you are being prevented from doing things like a sequence analysis or any number of things like you want to do image analysis, eBay would store how good, what's the quality of the image, for example. If you want to do, look at a genome of music, hypothetically, you're not going to do that in SQL, so you're going to look for another alternative there. Right? So those would be the kinds of use cases to try to solve a business problem that would lead you down the path to say, I think it's time for us to look at something besides whatever it is that we're doing. I'll point out one more thing, too.
Please.
And that is that I saw this statistic recently that said 40% of the cost of bringing in a data system is connecting it to other data systems. So if that's the case, you have to ask yourself, do I want to do this in the cloud, or do I want to do this locally? Well, where is my existing data? Where are my existing systems? That may guide you down one path or another.
Excellent. Okay.
Now I'm going to ask for your help because
These are really smart people, and I'm not smart enough to ask the really smart questions, but you are. I'm crowdsourcing questions. Who's going to ask the first one and let me off the hook? Right here. God bless you.
So this is for Bob. And maybe the answer is no or impossible, but can you think of an instance? I know. Can you think of an instance where a limitation, the examples that you just given, where there is a limitation that is reasonable? For example, like going to Mars, right? Like, oh, well, we can't do that today. But we were talking about being able to look at historical data and if we're dumping data, or if you can't run certain types of queries or sequences. is there anything off the top of your head that you can think of that you're like, that hits a boundary that would be an acceptable limitation? Does that make sense? Or are there none anymore?
Well, to be unrealistic, say there's none. It's possible that the system that you have does exactly everything that you want, and you really don't need to do anything else. But you want to do more of the same thing on it. Like, you want to double the size of the number of analysts that are using the system. And today, the analyst workload essentially has it at 95%. Well, if you double the number of analysts, chances are good that they'll be sitting around twiddling their thumbs. So at that point, you might not need new technology, you might just need more of it. But now you're going to look at, well, is my solution to how do I increase capacity? Do I throw away the system that I have and get this really big new one? Or do I incrementally add on? And not every piece of technology is going to let you choose one or the other. I don't know if that answers your question.
But please, may I jump in as well? I think there's this interesting intersection of the knowing what's possible and finding business questions to answer. I've been talking with a couple of different companies recently who built these academic university-built models so that can take the Wi-Fi routers in a store, and just by walking into the store with your phone on, your phone is Wi-Fi on, whether you connect to the network or not, it's sending out pings saying, are there any Wi-Fi networks out there? Even if you're connected to a Wi-Fi network, it's sending out pings saying, is there anything stronger? Am I on the strongest node? And it sends its MAC address. And they've modeled ways based on the movements around the store to actually look at the signal strength and the way it communicates, the ping interval, and so forth, to actually place you geophysically in the store to an accuracy level far more accurate than any GPS system. And this is a ton of interesting data. And you see that, and you're like, okay, what do I do with that? And suddenly all these business questions start deriving on targeting and segmentation and tracking over time and longitudinal analysis and cross-channel marketing and these things that you never even thought to ask until you realized, hey, that's possible. I don't ever remember thinking, man, if someone could come up with a Cisco device that would actually track me through the store, that'd be great. I never asked that question. So I do think there's this evolution that happens hand in hand where you discover these technologies, you start asking new questions, you push the limits, and then people seek out new technology solutions to answer that business pressure, which is the fun part of all of our jobs.
And who else has a question?
Right in front. Mara?
So it could be argued that all data is big data at this point, that we are getting so much information so quickly that it's all big data. At what point, and Joe, you were just talking about it a little bit, at what point do we reach some sort of diminishing returns, that we don't have any more business questions to answer, or the amount of effort that it takes to answer these questions is just too much?
Is this the 640K is more than enough memory for the computer question?
Something like that, yeah. Anybody?
That bums me out. Seriously. I go, cool, that's really sad. And this is why, I vehemently agree with your whole don't lock down the shop, let everybody get in and play. Because, and I'll talk specifically to life at Pandora. So I got about 200 or so employees today. I think my FP&A guy just told me I had a heart attack. And the average age is about 47. So I am swimming in the new generation of millennials. And all of the fun and excitement that comes with it. But one of the things that is just magical about them is they don't have rules in this world. And they ask the most interesting questions. And when you put them in this world, I don't think you're going to run out of questions. Because they just look at things in a very different way. And I'd almost say to everybody in here, if you're not thinking about this with this new generation, and heck, not even millennials, but Generation Z who's coming up, this is expected by, as a consumer for every single one of our products, but expected in just day-to-day breathing life. Part of me as an old person went, oh my God, you need to tell me that American Eagle Outfitters knows how much I weigh. When I walk in the door, I'm never going in the store again. Because I'm old and I don't like that. But the younger generation expect that of us and expect that of you. And going and saying there aren't any questions left means you haven't looked at it differently. Or
So
maybe
I'm gonna try to paraphrase. I think what I heard is there a diminishing return on, is there an ROI of ROI? If it costs $12 million to ask a question in order to get a 2% increase in sales, and you're Walmart, it's worth it.
Yeah.
But for the rest of us, it's not. So have we now kind of popped the lid off that and saying, we really do have cheap enough processing and cheap enough storage that we can store 10 years worth of stuff and ask almost anything? Or are you cycling through yeah, that's an interesting question, but we don't have enough computer for it anymore?
Is the answer worth it?
Is the answer worth it?
It's
Not always.
No.
Not always.
Yeah.
But if every question that you ask get answers with a positive ROI, then you're not out farming, right? You got to ask a lot of questions and fail. You got to find correlations that you say, aha, I found a correlation. How do I prove causation? I now program an experiment. The experiment may fail. You say, aha, okay, well, I learned something. So a lot of the expense that you will go through trying to get to an insight may get you nowhere, and thus it's a net negative. But hopefully you learn something from it, and you can bring it back in and adjust.
I'm going to answer a little differently, because I think the question also may stem from something I've dealt with in many of my roles. I kind of call it shiny object syndrome, or the buzzword bingo. So okay, Hadoop, open source, it's free, low cost hardware. Everyone who's anybody is doing this. We need one of those. That's not a business requirement. There's no ROI on keeping up with the Joneses. So I think some of this, and this predates technology, is are you building ROI? Are you doing the appropriate economic analysis on any project you take on? Okay, we don't have our own community site or our own mobile app, or are we integrated into Facebook, or do we have a Hadoop platform for big data, whatever the question is. And fundamentally, it should start with, if we had one of those, how would that change our business? What business question is out there that we're not answering by doing or not doing this? And I also think it comes to me, the downside of shiny object is you're always seeking the next shiny object. Is this something that fundamentally we're going to continue to bet on for the future? So you don't run out of questions. Is there any value in this for the long haul? Is another thing that has to be asked, which things don't stay shiny for long. And I think we've fought that for years with every new wave of technology and every new shiny object. And you have to, I'm a big fan of focus, which is, what are we really trying to solve? What are the business questions? And as sexy, as PR-worthy as something may be, is it going to help us meet our business needs?
Going to open the floor up again. Looking for a raised hand. Oh good, thank you. About to berate a whole audience and you saved me. I'm happy to hear that.
So from an ROI perspective, I want to take the conversation further and think about, it's extremely awesome that these days we, from an analytics standpoint, can provide so much ROI and measure and make statistical significant all of that stuff. But back to the question of how much is it worth it? If you were, from a CEO perspective, how does the dynamic of big data answers and the impact that they have on the organization to compare from the CEO perspective into the other aspects of him where he can invest, like operations and so on? Will the CEO think like, I think that by investing in big data, I'm going to make much more money out of improving my supply chain, for example. So how does it compare in that scale of organizations?
So I'll tell a story about big data.
Hey.
We had an idea at eBay that some behavior on the site, which is that sellers were listing duplicates and essentially spamming sort of results. We had this idea that this was suboptimal for the overall marketplace, so we had to see if we could prove it. So we threw some data into a Hadoop system. We played with it for a little bit and modeled it out. and came up with this model that said, we believe that if we put a policy in place that says no more duplicates, it would benefit the marketplace by having people, more customers would bid on the same thing and bid that price up. So sellers would benefit because they get higher prices for their stuff. Buyers would benefit because they're going to be overwhelmed with spam, and we benefit because the marketplace was doing better. So that was the hypothetical that we had. We put it into practice. We did not have to test it because we modeled it first, and we actually felt really confident in what we did. It came through, and it actually exceeded our expectations. It was a great policy for us. No technology, just policy change. I went to the CFO, and I said, we can do a whole lot more. These are the kinds of things we could do, but we need more money to do it. And his question to me was the exact question we should have asked. You're asking for a lot of money, and I could buy a company with that money that you're asking. Why should I spend it on that versus, say, buying another company, right, that could be accretive to our earnings? So I had to prove it, right? I had to say, these are the kinds of things that this enables. These are the kind of ROI you could expect. But you got to prove it first. Start small, have a specific question that you want to answer, and then say, we have a bunch of other questions. Our eyes are really big. We want to go after this prize, but we can't with what we have. Let's expand what we did, because we proved it before. Does that make sense? And he said yes, he didn't lie.
All right, we're going to take one more, and it could be you. You could be the one to ask the last question of the day. Yes.
Yeah, hi. My question's for any of you. Have you had a challenge where you come into an organization, past or present, and you have these big data, but who owns the big data? It's in IT or it's in a different organization, and I don't know. Maybe you have to wrestle it or what. I've seen some of these global companies where, to really get what you need, to really drill down in business, it has to be prioritized, and that's 2015. In terms of getting it. Have you had a situation in the past, where you've had to really wrestle it or make the case for why marketing really needs to own this, or why your team, and what does that look like for you?
Sure.
Go ahead, you can be your version.
I've had many versions of that in my career. When I joined the Expedia brand, I inherited probably close to a dozen groups that each had their own data that were largely being pit against each other by very smart business owners who knew that they could have 3 different groups run the data 3 different ways and then just use whatever data worked best to get the money. It's challenging. Fundamentally, though, I believe each of us as analysts, as contributors to this community, have to decide what it is we're trying to get ourselves personally. I mean, to really own the data, I'm a deep believer it has to be driven top down, and there has to be some degree of centralized governance, whether it be literally owned in one place or some means of doing that. And I've seen organizations ebb and flow even on that, where they've gone really centralized, and then leadership changes and things that no longer becomes an emphasis. But I believe if you don't have that top-down, data-driven desire, where there's either initiatives you're spending money on that you've got to commit to getting the economic return, or it's just fundamentally the DNA or culture of the company, it's not possible to pull this off other than just some occasional, all the things aligned don't work. And if you're in an environment that doesn't have that centralization, I think you've got to ask yourself,